Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and start with verse 1. It says, during the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, saw another vision, following the one that had already appeared to me. In this vision, I was at the fortress at Suzu in the province of Elam and standing by the Uzza River. That's from Daniel 1, verses 1 and 2. Daniel sees a vision in chapter 8. This is 2 years after he had seen the vision in chapter 7. I didn't mean to do that, but anyway, it's 2 years after he sees the vision in chapter 7. And the vision in chapter 8 is really an enlightenment, or it's a furtherance of the vision that he had already seen in chapter 7. In chapter 7, he had seen all of these different beasts. And it was reminiscent of what Nebuchadnezzar had already seen. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, and when he saw it, what he saw was a statue. The head of it was gold, and that represented the Babylonian Empire. Then we see the other parts from the shoulders down to the waist. I got an echo. We see the shoulders down to the waist, and that represents the Medo-Persian Empire. From the waist down to part of the thighs, that is called the belly downward, that represented Greece. That was, then we have here, we got the bronze, and where we see Rome is represented, then we have clay or dirt feet, which represented the future. The same thing that this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw. In chapter 7, Daniel sees the head of gold, which would represent the lion that is winged. And again, this again represents Babylon. He goes on, he sees the bear that represents the Medo-Persian Empire, how they had taken over different parts of the empire. Then he goes on to see the leopard that's very fast and taking over things, that represented Greece. Then he sees this monster with many horns and things, and that represented Rome to come. The only difference in what Daniel saw in chapter 7 and what he sees in chapter 8 is that when he looks at chapter 8, he actually sees the same things, but he also sees this ram. This ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And he says that the ram, when he saw it, I don't want to go there, but it represents Medo-Persian Empire. And then, of course, then he sees this goat. And this represented Greece. He does see all the other things. And what I want to do is to look at the comparison. He sees this vision. He does not understand the vision. And what happens is God sends to him Gabriel to teach him what the vision means, or to tell him what the vision represents. So in verse 19, where our lesson started, it says, then he said, I am here to tell you what will happen later in time of wrath. What you have seen pertains to the very end of time. So he sees this vision that's related to the end of time. The scripture goes on to let us know when Gabriel goes on to tell him what each part of the vision meant. And what I've done is put what he saw on the left, and on the right is a part of our lesson that explains what it is that he saw. So in verse 3, he says, as I looked up, I saw a ram with two long horns, standing beside the river. One of the horns was longer than the other, and that would represent this one. And even though it had grown later than the other one, the longer horn came up last. It had grown later, but it was the bigger horn of the two. You would think that the first horn, the one that came first, would be the larger horn, but it was not. So here we have in verse 20, it says, the two-horned ram represent the two kings of Media and Persia. The kings of Media were the ones who took over the Babylonian Empire, the one that from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar, his son, they took over. After they took over the Babylonian Empire, then you had the Persians who came and took over the Medes. And this is why you have this longer horn. They took over the Medes. At the time, the Medes were very, very strong. They took over the Medes and they went on to conquer many, many lands. And this is why this horn is longer, even though it came to being at a later date. There was no nation that could conquer the Medo-Persian Empire at the time. They did whatever they wanted to do. And the scripture lets us know that they stamped out many other countries. So while they were stamping out other countries, the rams, the male sheep with the two horns, of different sizes, is standing by this river. Now, as he's standing by this river, there comes a goat with a long horn in the center. The scripture says, as I watched, suddenly a male goat appeared from the west, crossed the land so swiftly that he didn't even touch the ground. The goat, which had one very long horn between its eyes, headed toward the two-horned ram that I had seen standing beside the river, rushing at him in a rage. A part of our lesson that goes here, that's what he saw. Then the explanation says, the shaggy male goat represents the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn between his eyes represents the first king of Greece, of the Grecian Empire. Now, what they had looked at, this represents Daniel standing there looking. You notice that this ram is up on a hill. What cities would do, or what their kingdoms would actually do, they would build their cities up on a hill. If they didn't have one, they would mount the dirt upward, kind of like when you build a house, they put down dirt first. They would mount dirt upward so that their city would sit elevated, and that way it could protect itself from the enclosing enemies, because they could see the enemy coming from a distance if you are elevated. So they were elevated. Daniel is standing looking at the ram upon his mountain. Ram he has stamped out all kinds of people, basically meaning he's taken over many empires, one after the other. The ram is confident in what he can do because, again, he has two horns. His horns indicate his power. He had a lot of power. This is the Mede Empire. And of course, they did take over a lot of people, including they took over Babylon and so on. The interesting thing about this is that when Daniel sees this vision, there was a difference, because when he saw the other vision, he had his dream, he saw the Babylonian Empire first. In this one, he does not see the Babylonian Empire at all. He sees the Medes and the Persians. This is a ram. By then, Belshazzar had been taken over, or the Babylonian Empire had been taken over by the Medes. After the Medes took over, then you have the Persians to take them over, and they grew inside and they did whatever they wanted to do. Again, he said that this goat that comes to fight against the ram with the one horn was fierce, and it came charging after the ram. Now, you would think that something with one horn would not be as powerful as something that had two horns. But Daniel also lets us know that the goat ran so fast and it was moving so fast that his feet barely did not touch the ground. That just gave an indication of just how fast he was taking over one country after the next country after the next. This goat with the horn in between his eyes represented Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was about 19 years old when he took over after his father died. He took over one land after the next after the next. He came from Macedonia that was in the west, and he went on to take over many, many empires. He took over most of the known world at that time. He was fierce, and being young, I guess he was like, he didn't have any fear in him. He just thought, I can do this, and he did it. One after another. He was able to get people to join him, to fight against the others. And so he had the whole Grecian Empire fighting against whomever. And even though sometimes their army was smaller than the army that they defeated, they were so fast and he had trained them so well that they were able to conquer whoever they had gone up against. So now in verse 7, this is what Daniel sees. He says, the goat charged fiercely at the ram and struck him, breaking off both his horns. Now the ram was helpless, and the goat knocked him down and trampled him. No one could rescue the ram from the goat's power. Again, Alexander the Great was powerful. He did whatever he wanted to do. He took over one country after the next country after the next country. He trampled one country under the ground after the next, which means he made them collapse. And he went on to do bigger and bigger and more and more. And there was nobody, even though a country may have other countries aligned with it, nobody was able to defeat Alexander the Great. He, like I said, he was 19 when he started, but at the height of all that he was doing, when he was in his early 30s, I think our commentary said he might have been 33, some others say he was 34, somebody said he was 32, so I know he was in his early 30s. In his early 30s, he got a fever, a very high fever, and from that high fever, he died. Now, since he died, you had a struggle then with his generals. He had 4 generals who fought for his territory that he had conquered. I went ahead of myself. Verse 8, let me read it. The goat became very powerful, but at the height of his power, his large horn was broken off. That meant that's when he died from the high fever, okay? In the place of the large horn, in the large horn's place grew 4 prominent horns pointing from the 4 directions of the earth. Gabriel explains to Daniel that the 4 prominent horns that replaced the 1 large horn show that the Greek Empire would break into 4 kingdoms. But none of them would be as great as the first. None of them would be as great as Alexander's kingdom. And here we can see a goat that has 4 horns. This is an actual picture of a goat, but there are some that with 4 horns. But again, none of them were as great as Alexander himself. They fought over his land that he had conquered, and it ended up being divided. This is the known land that Alexander had conquered. He went from, this is where he came from, right in here, in Macedonia. He conquered this part of Asia Minor. He goes down here to Egypt, conquers that, goes over here into Persia, takes all of this property, all of this land. These little bitty white dots represent the major towns that he founded. The red dots indicate the cities that he had conquered one by one. So you can see he took over much of the land that was known in the world at that time. Now, after his death, this is what we see. We see that there were four generals that took over. These were the ones who had worked for Alexander the Great. Again, they fought over his land, and they were able then, one after another, when they took parts of the land. Now, these four generals, Cassandra took over Macedonia. This is the area where they come from originally. You had Antigonus, I think that's how you say it. Antigonus, he ruled over Asia Minor. Then you had Ptolemy, who ruled over Egypt. And then you had Successius the third, who ruled over Syria and over the rest of this whole area. So all of them took a share, and of course, Successius took the largest share of the kingdom that Alexander the Great had conquered. Now, that's important to know that Successius took over this because he has a son that comes along later. Okay. Verse 10. Again, this is what he saw. Its power was reached to the heavens, where it attacked the heavenly army, throwing some of the heavenly beings and some of the stars to the ground and trampling them. It even challenged the commander of the heavens army by canceling the daily sacrifices offered to him and by destroying his temple. Verse 24 is the explanation. He will become strong. We're talking about, again, one of these generals, we're talking about now his son. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause a shocking amount of destruction and succeed in everything he does. He will destroy powerful leaders and devastate the holy people. In verse 23 and 24, you have a foreshadowing of the Antichrist. Another king arrives. It says he grows out of one of the horns, or one of the generals that came from Alexander the Great. He came from Successius, the one who had the larger amount of land. Now, when Successius dies, his brother was next in line to take over. And what we have here is the one who does take over kills his older brother because he wants the power. Not only does he kill his older brother, but he kills anybody else that he thinks might try to destroy his power or take any power from him. He makes his way to become great by murder and by bribery. If he could not bribe you into what he wanted you to do, then he actually had you executed, or he executed you himself in some kind of way. So he grows up and he does become very, very powerful. He does a lot of things that the Jews considered him to be the worst of the rulers, worst of the people who had taken over their land. He called himself, his name was Antichrist. He called himself Antichrist Epiphanes, which meant that he called himself the royal leader or the holy leader. So he exalted himself to the point that he thought that he was a god. And that's why our scripture said that he even fought against the heavenly army, against the stars, and he threw them down to the ground and trampled over them. He came up, he traveled from Persia to Egypt, and he went southward. He covered over Judea, and he went into the holy place. When he took over Judea, he went into the holy place, and according to Josephus, who was a commentator or a historian of the Jews, he says that I'm sorry, I've just went totally talked wrong. Epaphroditus invaded and he destroyed Jerusalem. That he totally destroyed them. And one thing that he did, he erected a statue of Zeus up. He erected that statue in the temple. He took down a lot of the holy things that they had relied upon. He considered himself to be a god, and he wanted people to worship him. He did all sorts of things, like he would take the sacrifices that they made. The priest would make a morning sacrifice and an afternoon sacrifice to God. He took that away, and instead of them having being able to have their sacrifices offered to God, he took a pig and put it in the holy place. And he offered it as a sacrifice, basically to himself. He did it to make the Jews sick, to show them the kind of power that he had. You know, Jews had nothing to do with pigs, nothing to do with swine or with pork. So he takes this swine, he puts it in the temple. So he desecrates the temple. He put it into a position where the Jews would not even want to enter the temple. He sacrificed the pigs on the temple, in the temple at the altar. He takes the blood, because they cut its throat first and let the blood drip out from it. He takes the blood of this pig and he sprinkles that all over the altar. So he's really desecrating what God has there, and the worship that the people have. You can imagine, if you just think for yourself, even though we don't have an altar of sacrifice, if somebody came in with any kind of an animal, let's say they did do a pig, and bring that into the church, slaughter it, and just sprinkle it all over the pulpit and all over, you'll be sick to your stomach. This is what happened to the Jews. And so they didn't even want to enter the temple. Then he made them eat the pigs that he had sacrificed. Now, to us, eating pig may not be a big thing, but to them, they thought that of that as being disgusting. It's like you eating a rat. It was disgusting to them, because the pigs were considered to be unclean animal. They could not eat that. That was against their dietary rules from the time of Moses. The Lord told them not to eat that. So they had followed these rules, and here is somebody who comes in and takes over and forces you to eat that thing that you have never eaten, and decided that it's against God's rule. So now I said, I'm forcing you to do this thing anyway. He erected not only a statue of Zeus, he asked the people to bow down to him and worship him. He called himself the illustrious one, or the one who is godlike, but the Jews called him crazy. They said he was a madman. It was at this time, a little later on, that the Maccabees, who were Jewish, took over. They went in to clean the temple. They ended up fighting against Epaphroditus, I just lost my name. They end up fighting against him, and actually winning, and they have to restore the temple. He had basically destroyed all the worship that was in Judah, Jerusalem included. So these were things that he had trampled, and this is why the scripture said he trampled the stars of God to the ground. He was not, the priests couldn't make their sacrifices, and it's like he just stepped on them and just trampled them. He took away the leadership. That would be the priest and anybody else who was in leadership position, and he devastated the holy place. Okay, and through his policy, also, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. And craft, we mean witchcraft and sleight of hand, stuff like that. He caused those things to prosper. He magnified himself in his own heart. And I already said he considered himself to be a God and he wanted people to worship him. And by peace shall destroy many. And he shall stand against the prince of princes and shall be broken without hand. Again, he stood up against the priest. He stood up against all that God represented. And anybody who fought against him, he had hundreds, if not thousands of Jews executed because they did not follow his direction. So, and that's why the Jews said he was the very worst dictator that came upon them because of all of the horrible things that he did and the number of people that he had killed because they did not follow what he wanted them to do. And that's why King James Version talks about the transgressions that he made, that the fact that he sinned so, and that he threw down truth. And then he, from throwing down truth or throwing down what God had taught them to do, or what they had been following that was true to God all of this time, that he prospered in that. And Epiphanes, that was he was a type of Antichrist, even though he was not the Antichrist, but he was a type of Antichrist. He did everything that he could do to show himself powerful. He did everything that he could do to show himself as being smart, to being crafty, to having high intelligence. He was a schemer. He executed people as well. I already said that. But again, to some of the other people who were not Jews, they looked up to him because of the power that he had, because of the fact that they said, oh, he can do all of these things. And then they looked at the Jews, they said, well, where is your God? Since this person could come in and do everything, he's claiming to be a God, and maybe he's more powerful than your God. God allowed those things to happen to the Jews because they had sinned. And sometimes we get caught up in what we do and we don't see ourselves, but we can see somebody else. And then we wonder, well, why is that God letting this stuff happen to them? And it's all, again, it goes back to sin. So he's broken down things with his own hands. And now he's elevated himself to the point of thinking that he is a God. And the people actually said he was merely crazy because he really and truly believed that he was a God. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, it says, the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and all sorts of evil that deceive those who are perishing. It lets us know that Satan does have power. He does not have all power, but he does have power, and he can even deceive those. He presents himself as an angel of light. And that's in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 14 through 15 says, Satan masquerades as an angel of light. His servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Sometimes people will present things to you that just sound like it ought to be right when it's actually wrong. I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of one right now. Okay, let's say on this first pew, somebody was sitting there. They leave. There was the only person sitting there. They leave, and there's a $100 bill right there. Now, you found a $100 bill, and it might seem right to you since finders keepers. But you know that there was one person sitting there on that front pew. The right thing to do would be to ask that person, did you lose something? Right? If they said yes, and they said, what did you lose? And then they'll tell you, they check their wallets or whatever. Oh, I lost $100. You give it to that person because that's what's right. But Satan will tell you, you found this. Ain't nobody at the church, right there on that pew right now, you found it, is yours. Your lucky day. It may seem right, but it's wrong. And so this is what, and then you might even have somebody you ask, if you find some money laying down, what would you do with it? And they'll say, I'll keep it. Again, they give you some wrong advice, but but this person may be your friend, so he's disguising himself as a servant of righteousness. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, it says, and the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So we do have upon the earth angels of Satan, or what I got here. Let me go back. I lost my PowerPoint. Oh, here we go. Angels who are followers of Satan. The last slide. The vision of the evening and the morning that had been given to you is true. This is what Gabriel says to Daniel. For it concerns a distant future. Daniel goes on to say, I, Daniel, was worn out. I laid exhausted for days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. Even though an angel came to Daniel and told him what different parts of that vision represented, he still did not understand the full thing. And that lets us know another thing that is written in Corinthians, that we know in part, we see in part, and we know in part. But when we see him, when we're in heaven, we see it, then we'll understand a lot of things that we don't understand right now. I don't know it all. You don't know it all. None of us do. We know in part. And even those things that God has revealed to us, he may not have revealed it all at the same time. He has shown us bits and pieces. Even showing Daniel, this stuff that he showed Daniel did not all happen one after the next, after the next, after the next in great succession. This was over hundreds of years. When Daniel was shown this vision, Belshazzar was still king, the Babylonian king. And from there, you had the Medes who took over Belshazzar. Remember when he was drinking wine out of the holy instruments and having a party, he had the writing on the wall. So we had all of those things to happen. And then from the Medes that took over, and then from the Medes, you had the Persians to take over them. And from there, you had Alexander the Great just took over everything in sight. And from there, we had Alexander dies, and we have the four kings, the four generals who took over from there. And then his son of one of them took over from there. So we had all of this stuff happening. And you can imagine if you were Daniel and God has shown you all this stuff, that's a lot to think about. And that's why Daniel said he was worn out and exhausted for a lot of days, for several days. And after that period of exhaustion, of being sick, basically he was sick too sick to get up. The scripture does let us know that when the angel first started talking to him, that he fell to his face, that he actually fainted. So it was not a very pleasant vision for Daniel. And then the angel told him to seal it up, and that it was not for right now. The whole vision was not for right now, but it was for a later time. Daniel started out writing in Aramaic, and this was a language that the Jews and the Chaldeans could read. But then in the middle of him writing, I forgot which verse, might be verse 3 or 4, he started writing in Hebrew that only the Jews could read, because he felt that it would be a problem with the Chaldeans reading this whole thing if one of them came to it. So God has a way of doing things. Are there some questions? Daniel, I'm thinking that Daniel had become older. I don't know exactly how old he was. I do know that when he went into Babylon, he was a very young man. This is after Nebuchadnezzar had died and Belshazzar is now the king. So he had to be probably 50s or older by this time. Huh? 70. Okay. I knew he would have to be old. I know exactly how old he was. I forgot. Thank you. About 70 years old. And you can imagine that's a lot for a 70-year-old to go through. That's true. She just said Judd on the Isle of Pat, but that was a lot for him to go through too. He was older at that time. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Um, okay, for those of you who are online, she just said that the Alexander the Great's high fever was attributed to malaria. Some say it was malaria, others say it was alcohol poisoning. And okay. I know that when I read what is it called, Western Civ or World Civilization, I forgot which one it was. I know I didn't like it at the time. uh, it did say that it was thought that he had that it was alcohol poisoning that caused his high fever. But we do know that he was aggressive and that he was a great fighter, and he was just he died in the middle of his prime of his life at 30 something years old. That's true. He was only 19 when he came to power, and he had the influence of others. But then not only did he have the influence of others, he influenced other people because of his cunning. His father made sure that he had the best of education, and he went, from there. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. If nothing else, thank y'all. Let me see. I do want to remind y'all that we are going to have black light practice right after morning service. And I think I'm going to ask Reverend Evans to announce it for me because I'll forget because somebody may not be online who's going to be at practice. Okay, then. Anything else? That it? All right, y'all have a good day. See some of y'all in the service. Oh, you online. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes, and I will make the announcement.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. A wonderful, wonderful teaching, Sister Gill.
Thank you much. Okay, y'all have a good day. Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Say what? Well, thank you, ma'am. Hey, Miss Dot, is that you?
Hey, Miss Hill. Yes, this is me.
All right.
I finally got on. I guess last Sunday I wasn't here. I didn't get a chance to get on. You had changed the password, so I had to call Sister Urgent Team to get it. Not the password, but the ID number.
They changed ID number. I don't know why. It was something about the length of time we had been using the same ID number, something for security for sakes. I don't know. Why,
Yes.
whatever,
Yeah,
but
I know you hadn't mentioned it, but I got on the next following Sunday after I got here. But
mhm.
then when I tried to come on this Sunday, I couldn't get on.
Hmm.
Did you not send the new number out?
I did, but
You
I will
did?
again, I'll
Oh,
just send one to everybody.
oh,
I'll do
okay
an
then, because
email.
Sister Hill gave, I mean, Sister Jones gave it to me, so I wrote it down.
Okay, great.
I appreciate that. Thank
Uh-huh.
you.
All right,
See
bye-bye.
y'all Tuesday night.
Okay, then, see you Tuesday night. Bye-bye.
Don't forget to send me the link.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so kindly. Y'all have a blessed day now.
Okay, you too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Where you want to do it?